Welcome to Delta Wave History, your sanctuary for functional historical boredom. Our focus will remain on the historical, methodical, numerical, and the procedural. This allows your mind to unwind and drift into historical details. Please adjust your volume for a consistent, even tone. We aim for a predictable vocal rhythm, devoid of sudden shifts in pitch or intensity, designed to facilitate a state of tranquil observation and sleep if you wish. We begin our investigation by looking closely at a single, undisturbed fragment of 19th century Alençon lace resting against a dark velvet background. The stark contrast immediately draws the eye, revealing a sprawling, frosty architecture of threads that seem almost too delicate to be handled. Yet, as we magnify the image, the illusion of fragility fades, replaced by the stark reality of immense, calculated tension. Before a single knot is formed, the foundation must be engineered on a piece of heavy, dark green parchment. A draftsman has already plotted the course, pricking microscopic holes into the thick paper to dictate the exact trajectory of the design. These minute perforations form the architectural blueprint, mapping out a rigid mathematical logic that the thread must obey. The thread itself is a marvel of 19th century agriculture and preparation, spun from exceptionally fine flax grown in the damp soils of Northern Europe. It is spun in damp, dark cellars to keep the fibers from snapping, resulting in a microscopic rope of unparalleled smooth density. This flaxen thread, barely thicker than a human hair, is loaded onto a tiny, highly polished steel needle. The first step is the trace, a continuous line of heavy thread tacked down flat onto the parchment blueprint. The needle passes down through the pricked holes and back up again, capturing the heavy tracing thread and holding it tightly against the flat surface. This creates the skeleton of the lace, a completely rigid outline of floral motifs and sweeping curves that will bear the weight of the entire structure. The tracing thread never pierces the parchment. It only rides along the surface, tacked down by secondary basting threads. The needle moves methodically up and down, pulling the tacking thread taut, binding the skeleton to the paper in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Up through the parchment, over the trace, down through the parchment, pull to secure. This motion continues for hours, a monotonous, deliberate march along the plotted lines. The eye follows the curve of a single petal, watching the tracing thread bend and lock into place, millimeter by millimeter. The gentle, barely audible friction of the flax pulling against the stiff paper creates a quiet, rhythmic metronome. Once the skeleton is fully anchored, the true engineering begins inside the empty spaces of the petals and leaves. This is the filling, a dense network of buttonhole stitches packed so tightly together they form a solid woven fabric. The needle sweeps under the tracing thread, loops over the working thread, and pulls taut, creating a single, microscopic knot. Sweep under, loop over, pull taut. The first row of stitches hangs directly from the tracing thread, creating a tiny ridge of tension. The second row of stitches is worked directly into the loops of the first, building a cascading waterfall of locked knots. Sweep under, loop over, pull taut. The mind begins to lose itself in the repetitive nature of the build, watching row after row of stitches advance across the empty space of the petal. The thread is drawn tight with the exact same amount of force each time, ensuring the density of the filling remains perfectly, flawlessly uniform. Left to right, the needle moves, filling the void. Right to left, the needle returns, interlocking with the previous journey. There is no rush, only the steady, unyielding progression of the needle building a solid textile from thin air. When the solid motifs are filled, the needlewoman moves on to the most mathematically demanding portion of the Alençon lace, the réseau, or the ground mesh. This is the sheer, hexagonal net that connects the heavy floral motifs, suspending them in an invisible web. The needle is now threaded with an even finer flax, a filament so slight it seems to disappear in the light. The construction of the réseau is an exercise in rhythmic geometry, built entirely of twisted buttonhole stitches. The needle catches a microscopic section of the motif's edge, drops down, twists the thread twice around itself, and locks it into a loop. The thread is pulled down, holding the tension precisely, forming the upper left wall of a hexagon. Loop, twist twice, drop, pull. The needle moves laterally, creating a row of tiny, evenly spaced, suspended arches. The tension here is critical. If one arch is pulled a fraction of a millimeter too tightly, the entire geometric plane will warp and buckle. Loop, twist, twice, drop, pull. The gentle sway of the thread being drawn through the loops is deeply soothing to watch. It is a slow, methodical dance of steel and flax, turning a linear fiber into a two-dimensional mesh. As the second row of the mesh begins, the needle hooks into the bottom of the arches from the previous row. It pulls the thread down, twists it twice, and secures the knot, closing the geometric shape and forming a perfect, tiny six-sided figure. A hexagon is born. Hundreds of these hexagons must be built to fill even a single square inch of the background. Each one requires the exact same physical motions: the twist, the insertion of the needle, the smooth pull of the thread. The mind follows the repetitive rhythm, stepping from one loop to the next, over and over again. We watch the mesh grow row by row, a creeping frost of perfect geometry spreading across the dark parchment. The repetitive clicking of the needle against the thimble, the soft pull of the thread, the locking of the knot. Loop, twist, drop, pull. Loop, twist, drop, pull. The background slowly fills, the sheer netting providing a delicate contrast to the heavily stitched floral leaves. The eye traces the straight lines of the hexagonal columns, marveling at how human hands could maintain such robotic, flawless consistency over hundreds of hours. The netting continues to advance, covering the open gaps in the blueprint. As the hours turn into days, the rhythmic motion becomes hypnotic. The needle dips, the thread loops, the knot tightens, the mesh expands. With the foundation, the fillings, and the hexagonal net complete, the lace remains completely flat, lacking its signature dimension. It is time for the final defining architectural element, the coordinate. This is a heavy, raised outline that will trace every single edge of the design, giving the lace a structural rigidity reminiscent of miniature wrought iron. To create the coordinate, the needlewoman introduces a foreign element to the delicate flax, a single strand of stiff horsehair. This pale, translucent hair is laid carefully along the edge of the tracing thread, acting as a flexible structural core. The working needle, now threaded with a slightly heavier flax, prepares to entomb the horsehair. The needle dives under both the original tracing thread and the newly placed horsehair, bringing the working thread up and around in a tight buttonhole stitch. The stitch is pulled firmly, binding the horsehair to the edge of the flat lace. The needle dives again, sitting the next stitch flush against the previous one. Dive under, loop around, pull firm. The stitches are packed so densely that the horsehair vanishes entirely, replaced by a smooth, raised, cylindrical border of solid thread. The coordinate acts as a microscopic retaining wall, keeping the delicate mesh and fillings firmly in their designated places. Dive under, loop around, pull firm. The rhythmic binding of the border is slow and deeply deliberate. The needle traces the sweeping curve of a stylized rose petal, the raised outline catching the light and casting tiny, sharp shadows across the hexagonal mesh below. The creation of the coordinate demands immense hand strength and unwavering tension. Every single stitch must be pulled with equal force to ensure the raised border remains perfectly smooth and free of lumps. The repetitive microscopic tugging lulls the observer into a state of quiet focus. As the coordinate winds its way around the final leaf of the motif, the structural integrity of the piece is fully realized. It is no longer just thread. It is an engineered fabric capable of bending and folding without losing its intricate internal geometry. The heavy outline gives weight and finality to the sprawling design. Occasionally, along the outer borders of the lace, the needle pauses to construct a picot. This is a tiny freestanding loop of thread that juts out from the coordinate, adding a microscopic crown of texture to the edge. The needle loops the thread around a pin, twists it tightly, and stitches it back into the border. Pin, loop, twist, secure. The needle moves to the next designated spot, separated by exactly 3 millimeters. Pin, loop, twist, secure. The rhythm is unbroken, a calming punctuation mark at the very edge of the textile universe. With the stitching finally complete, the lace is fully constructed, but it remains trapped, anchored to the dark green parchment by hundreds of original basting threads. It is time for the release. A finely honed, razor-sharp steel blade is slipped horizontally between the layers of the parchment. The blade glides slowly, smoothly slicing through the basting threads that hold the skeleton to the paper blueprint. There is a soft, barely audible popping sound as each thread gives way, severing the physical tie between the finished architecture and its rigid foundation. One by one, the sections of the lace lift away from the parchment. The intricate mesh, the heavy fillings, the raised coordinate, they all release their grip, hovering slightly above the pricked holes that dictated their creation. The release is slow, careful, and deeply satisfying. The lace is gently peeled back, fully independent of its earthly tether. The dark parchment, scarred with microscopic pinholes and the severed ends of basting threads, is left behind. The textile is now a freestanding masterpiece, weighing only a fraction of an ounce. The completed fragment is laid down flat on a piece of dark velvet for final inspection. A small polished instrument called a bone folder is gently rubbed over the edges, smoothing out any microscopic irregularities in the coordinate. The gentle friction of the bone against the tight flax threads creates a quiet rustling sound. We look again at the completed work, our eyes tracing the path we just traveled. We see the heavy, dense fillings of the floral motifs. We see the raised, shadowy outlines of the horsehair borders. we see the sprawling, perfect geometry of the twisted hexagonal mesh. The eye follows the sheer netting, dropping from one twisted loop to the next. Down, twist, lock. Down, twist, lock. The mind gently drifts along the tiny geometric pathways, the camming of the stitches fading into a soft, indistinct hum. The structural logic of the thread holds firm, a testament to hundreds of hours of quiet, repetitive labor. The tension is perfectly balanced. The architecture is sound. The mind, having mapped every microscopic knot and loop, finally finds permission to rest, drifting downward into the soft, silent spaces between the threads. Discover more history by watching the next video. We're eager to share more with you. You can't go wrong. All our videos are deeply detailed, dull while fascinating, and distinctly sleep-inducing.